estrogen is not a hormone. It's a family of hormones. So there are 3 estrogens. E1 is estrone, E2 is estradiol, and E3 estriol. All of these are present in a reproductive aged woman, but in different quantities, percentages, based on what the body needs. Estradiol controls the immune system for turning on inflammation and turning off inflammation. But when you end up with too much estrone, you end up with too much inflammation and stimulation of cancers.
A lot of people are afraid of hormone replacement therapy because of the cancer scare. Talk to us about that.
Dr. Felice Gersh
is a world-renowned OB/GYN, integrative medicine pioneer, and best-selling author who's changing the way we talk about women's health.
With over 4 decades of clinical experience and dual board certifications,
she's leading a revolution that fuses cutting-edge science with holistic healing.
From PCOS to perimenopause, Dr. Gersh has become the go-to expert for women who want more than Band-Aid solutions.
Estradiol is very key to why you have a lower risk of dying if you get breast cancer when you're on hormones, is that estradiol causes the cells to be more like.
When it comes to the conversation of cancer and hormone replacement therapy, how do you approach hormone replacement therapy in women?
Well, I always say I'm a simple thinker. So I want to replicate.
Welcome back to the Dr. Brighten Show. I'm your host, Dr. Jolene Brighten. I'm board certified in naturopathic endocrinology, a nutrition scientist, a certified sex counselor, and a certified menopause specialist. As always, I'm bringing you the latest, most up-to-date information to help you take charge of your health and take back your hormones. If you enjoy this kind of information, I invite you to visit my website, drbrighten.com, where I have a ton of free resources for you, including a newsletter that brings you some of the best information, including updates on this podcast. Now, as always, this information is brought to you cost-free, and because of that, I have to say thank you to my sponsors for making this possible. It's my aim to make sure that you can have all the tools and resources in your hands and that we end the gatekeeping. And in order to do that, I do have to get support for this podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I know your time is so valuable and so important, and it's not lost on me that you're sharing it with me right now. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, or share this with a friend because it helps this podcast get out to everyone who needs it. All right, let's dive in.
Dr. Felice Gersh, welcome to the podcast.
Well, I'm so excited to be here and talk about my favorite hormone, estrogen.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get in good with estrogen, but I want to make sure everybody is on the same page. So when we say estradiol, what are we talking about?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because the word estrogen is bantered around and people don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So estrogen is not a hormone. It's a family of hormones, just like there is a family of B vitamins. You wouldn't interchange them. If you're deficient in B12, you can't solve the problem with B1.
Yeah.
So there are 3 estrogens that are in the adult female, and they have a number and a letter, just like the B vitamins. So E1 is estrone. E2, which is the one made by the ovaries, is estradiol. And E3, estriol, is the dominant estrogen produced by the placenta during pregnancy. But all of these estrogens are present in a reproductive aged woman, but in different quantities, percentages, based on what the body needs. Estradiol can be converted back and forth to estrone and a one-way street from estradiol into estriol. So it's all managed by the body to make everything right. And there's different estrogen receptors that bind differently to the different estrogens, creating different effects in different organs. So it's really important to understand that when you say the word estrogen, that means not that much, actually, if you're getting down to the nitty-gritty of what is actually happening.
Yeah. So you said estriol, or E3, that's predominant in pregnancy because it's predominantly made by the placenta. When do we see estrone and estradiol in a woman's life?
So you see a teeny bit of estriol in the reproductive age woman, and the estrogen from the ovary is estradiol, but there's plenty of estrone in the adult reproductive age female, and unfortunately, sometimes too much in the woman who is metabolically unhealthy, which usually involves having some excess abdominal fat, with the visceral fat, the really hostile inflammatory fat.
Yeah.
And also in postmenopausal women. And so estradiol can convert appropriately to estrone when the body wants it to be into that form, and it can convert back. But it turns out that adipose tissue, aka fat, has the same enzyme, aromatase, that's present in ovaries that can actually make different conversions and can convert the androgens that are predominantly coming from the adrenal gland. A little testosterone, that's about 25% of all the androgens is coming from the ovary as testosterone, and the rest is predominantly coming from the adrenal gland. But when you have a lot of inflammation, it upregulates this enzyme called aromatase and starts converting these androgens into estrone. And when you have a lot of inflammation, it downregulates the enzyme that can interchange to convert estrone back to estradiol. So you get stuck with estrone. And estrone isn't evil. It's all about proportions, like you can die of water intoxication. We always use those analogies. Because estrone isn't evil. It's just you don't want too much. You could have too much of a good thing. And estrone, differently than estradiol, binds pretty exclusively to the alpha receptor, which has different functions. So it's kind of simplistic, but really it's easy to think this way. Estradiol controls the immune system, the on-off switch for turning on inflammation and turning off inflammation. Estrone is predominantly the on switch. And you can think of estriol as predominantly the off switch, but you need the balance. And that's estradiol. That's why that's like the master of the different estrogens for the typical reproductive age woman. When you end up with too much estrone, then you are turning the on switch to inflammation, to proliferation, like uncontrolled growth. One of the wonderful things about estradiol is that it controls growth factors, which are so important for rejuvenation, replacement of cells, and control of mitochondria, the energy factories of cells. All this is under the auspices of estradiol. But estrone has different effects. So you end up with too much inflammation, uncontrolled proliferation, and that can underlie stimulation, not causation, but stimulation of cancers that have estrogen receptor positivity. And so unfortunately, a lot of the drugs that have been used as estrogens are oral estrogens, some of them from a horse's urine, conjugated equine estrogens, the ethinyl estradiol, which is not a real human estrogen, that's the dominant one in birth control pills, which you've talked about so much. And they taken orally, they are converted predominantly into estrone, creating an abnormal balance of these hormones that are so important. And so it's really so important to understand the differences between the estrogens. And that's led to, unfortunately, a dislike and fear of estradiol because of the harms that can come from inflammation. It's the inflammation that underlies the problem, and then the creation of too much estrone.
So I want to recap and say this back to people because I think it's just so important to underline what you said. So estriol, E3, that's going to have an anti-inflammatory effect. And that is, I think anyone who's been pregnant and has an autoimmune disease is like, this is why I feel better in my pregnancy. And that's one of the contributors to having less inflammation and autoimmune disease progression during pregnancy. But once you enter menopause, we've got estrone coming online. And there's a lot of changes that are happening with estrone and with menopause altogether. And estrone is the on switch. We're turning on inflammation, whereas estradiol, it can be on or off. It's a regulator. So I just wanted to reiterate all that.
Perfect. And that is so true that many autoimmune diseases, the one that has the most research is like multiple sclerosis. They go into remission because of the estradiol down-regulating the innate immune response. And that's, of course, so important and part of pregnancy, so that you don't actually kill your fetus with your immune system, which also involves progesterone. So it's really complicated. But learning about pregnancy is really amazingly significant for understanding the immune system and how these hormones interact and how they relate to immune function.
Yeah. And so people know, if they're like, why would my body kill my baby? Because your immune system is designed to attack anything that is non-self, that's not you. And baby is genetically distinct, different from you. So your immune system would identify that and say, we have a foreign invader. But the body, with its wisdom, I mean, and the way it orchestrates everything is so beautiful, and how it builds that tolerance. I want to go back to the metabolic piece, because you really underscored the issues with inflammation. Talk to us about the interplay between estrogen and our metabolic health.
Oh, it's so key. So, and it's like always, there's more complexity than first meets the eye.
Yeah.
When you have inflammation, the inflammation creates, part of inflammation is circulating inflammatory cytokines. These cytokines are produced by immune cells, and they're designed to signal and tell other immune cells to do things and to create reactions. And this is life-saving if you have trauma, injury, or you're infected with a pathogen like bacteria or virus. So we do not want to have no functional immune system with the creation of inflammation. It's out of control inflammation that is key to all the diseases known as the degenerative diseases of aging, which plague women in menopause even more than men. So estradiol, because when you don't have it, which 100% of women are going to lose it with their ovarian senescence, and so you end up in this state of inflammation. It also relates to the gut microbiome. You get leaky gut, you get alteration. So it's multiple levels that you get this systemic level of inflammation. These inflammatory cytokines damage directly the mitochondria. So mitochondria are essential for the creation of energy and control of the cell cycle. Part of the cell cycle is when a cell should die. We call that apoptosis, or programmed cell suicide. So when a cell gets old and yucky, and sometimes we call them senescent cells or even zombie cells. Right?
I do love that word.
I know. I wish I had coined it. I know. Because they are insidiously harmful to the body, like they're invading our civilization. So they create this ongoing inflammation because they just won't die. It's like the grade B movie where the monster won't die. Like, didn't that monster die already? No, it's back. It's back. These zombie senescent cells create ongoing inflammation, which is so harmful. And, damages the lining of arteries and creates neuroinflammation, which can trigger all the diseases of the brain, including Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all of your vascular dementia, just horrible stuff that happens in joints and bones and everything. So we do not want zombie cells. And you need to have this mechanism, which is controlled by mitochondria, to say, now cell die. Now, also, these zombie cells, because they're ongoing old, yucky cells, they can have damaged mitochondria. I mean, they can have damaged DNA, which can lead to the formation of cancer. So these zombie cells have multiple levels of harm. So promoting cancer, we all know, I hope everybody knows, that which demographic has the most cancer? Young people or old people? It happens to be old people by a lot. Young people, unfortunately, get cancer for other reasons, endocrine disruptors, antibiotics, gut dysbiosis, and things like that. But old people get it because of this mitochondrial problem that doesn't allow these old yucky cells to die. In addition, mitochondria create energy. And estradiol, it turns out, has a role in all the different aspects of mitochondrial function to maintain mitophagy, which is like cellular renewal when it's called autophagy. Mitophagy is renewal like within the mitochondria itself. It's like rejuvenating the mitochondria, and when it's time for them to die, it allows them to die to then be replaced with mitogenesis under the control of estradiol. The creation of energy with the electron transport chain that makes ATP. People have heard of that. We want plenty of that so that we can do everything we want, have all the organs work optimally. That requires estradiol. Now, in the process of making ATP, you have a metabolic byproduct that is very toxic called superoxide. It's 2 oxygen molecules. Now, we need to get that out of the mitochondria, but it can't. It doesn't have any mechanism to exit and then get out of the mitochondria, but it's poison to the mitochondria. So there's an enzyme that's in the mitochondria called manganese superoxide dismutase, which converts this toxic superoxide to another poison, hydrogen peroxide. But unlike superoxide, hydrogen peroxide can diffuse out of the mitochondria into the cell where other enzymes convert it to harmless water. So we have O2 to H2O2, out of the mitochondria to H2O, water, under the auspices, the control of estradiol to have this enzyme work. So when you lose your estradiol with menopause, there are so many things that are going wrong in that mitochondria. You have the promotion of inflammation that damages it. You can't make energy with the electron transport chain. You can't do the renewal and the proper elimination of mitochondria with mitophagy. And you can't get rid of the superoxide byproduct of creation of energy. So what happens? Everything deteriorates in the body. Energy, which is what metabolism is. And everyone knows, I want a really good metabolism, right? I don't want a slow metabolism. Well, you got to have mitochondrial function, metabolism, the production, distribution, storage of energy. Energy is what differentiates life from death. You know, when we look at energy in the brain, we look at an EEG, right? It's energy. In the heart, an EKG. That's the little, you know, when you see it, and everyone knows from watching movies, TV, that when you see the EKG monitor in the person in the hospital room, and then it goes, that means no energy in the heart. That's called death. In the brain, it's brain death. We need energy, and we don't want a little. We want plenty. And women are unique. They're different from men because only women can do what? Make babies. So when a woman is pregnant, her heart has to pump at least 50% more blood volume. So a woman's heart has to have extra energy. So the mitochondria that produce energy in the heart are extra special in women in their ability to make energy. And even not only estradiol has receptors, but metabolic byproducts that are created in the liver from estradiol, like 2-methoxy-estradiol. It's a metabolic byproduct. It's made from estradiol, but it has its own unique receptors. And there are other things. We don't know what they are. They're called estrogen-related receptors. So what that means is we don't know what binds to the receptor. That's called the ligand, but we don't know what it is. But what we do know, if you don't have estradiol present, it won't bind, and that binding creates more energy in the heart. So women uniquely get what's called mild diastolic dysfunction. They have a low energy heart, a stiffer heart, and this can lead to a unique form of heart failure, most common in postmenopausal women, called heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Ejection fraction is the blood coming out of the heart when you pump. That part's fine. That's the part that usually is what causes heart failure in men after they have like a heart attack. This is unique. This is truly a low energy heart, which you can actually see on an echocardiogram, but it's not even usually like looked at or talked about by most cardiologists. They simply say, oh, lots of women have this. Yeah, they do. That's a sign of a low energy heart. And of course, the brain needs so much energy. Women have 2.5 times the incidence of Alzheimer's as men due to this low energy and then the dysregulation of the immune system, and of course, you know, having other problems like inflammation, from systemic inflammation coming in, neuroinflammation. So there's a host of reasons, but mitochondria are also at the key, at the focus of having a low energy brain. And now it's been shown that just about all women as they're transitioning into menopause have problems with word finding. It's always nouns. Like, so, everyone can remember their adjectives and their verbs. So it's like a game of charades, like, what was that thing that we saw? What was the name of that restaurant? What was her name? She was wearing a red dress. Her hair was this way. They can describe, but they can't remember anybody's names. They can't remember places. And they feel like they're losing their mind. And it's totally not true. It is kind of true. They are having changes in cognition, and that is not a good thing. So that's why I cheer Estradiol every day, because understanding is the first step to solving the problem.
You've mentioned cancer a few times. A lot of people are afraid of hormone replacement therapy because of the cancer scare. Talk to us about that.
That is so sad for me. When I think back, I was only among the 20% of doctors who were actually practicing medicine when the Women's Health Initiative came out in 22. That's like 2002. That's a long time ago now. And it turns out they did a survey, only 20% of actual practicing doctors today were in practice then. So like the lost wisdom of what happened prior was gone, and education went down the tubes as far as menopause and hormones, and the current practitioners, they weren't taught. And what happened was so devastating, because this Women's Health Initiative, actually, we knew before the study even started that this combination of medroxyprogesterone acetate, MPA, which is not progesterone, it's and actually you can call it an endocrine disruptor for progesterone, and the conjugated equine estrogen. This is estrogen from a pregnant horse that it's trying to get rid of. It's already gone through the liver to be modified so it can be water soluble and go out the urine, and the horse is trying to get rid of it, and it contains estrogens like equine estrogens. These are not even found ever in a human. This is a form that would never be in a human. Then they swallow it, which makes whatever is human turn into estrone, and then you have all these other unique horse estrogens going into a human female. Well, it turned out that a little bit, and actually not that much, because you know all about birth control pills, about the same degree as a birth control pill can increase breast cancer, happened with medroxyprogesterone acetate. Not with the Premarin. Unbelievably, even that horse urine stuff turned out to be breast cancer protective. Like, who would have figured that? Because they've done now, many studies have come out, there have been big publications recently showing that any of those forms of estrogen are actually breast cancer protective. And why would that be? Because it creates energy, and energy keeps the cells alive, so you don't get the senescent cells and all that stuff we talked about. And the medroxyprogesterone acetate turns out to be an agonist, or like a similar to progesterone in some places, like in the uterine lining, but it turns out that it's actually an anti-progesterone in other places, like in the breast. And progesterone, and I talk about this more and more now, progesterone is anti-breast cancer. The real thing. The real P4, not these pretend, and that's another problem. We talk about estrogen. People don't know what you're talking about. People use the word estrogen for endocrine disruptors, and for xenoestrogens. It's like, I'm going to give you your estrogen today. Lick this plastic bowl. And you're like, what? Because it's a xenoestrogen. And progesterone is anti-breast cancer. It's anti-proliferative. It doesn't stimulate growth. It's the opposite. So I have a whole list of studies that show, it's pretty indisputable, that progesterone is anti-breast cancer. So estrogen and progesterone, both individually and separately, are anti-breast cancer. No one should think that nature gave females hormones to give them breast cancer. When you think, who gets the most breast cancer? Women with their own bioidentical functioning hormones are working around their body, doing all the things they're supposed to do, or old women who have no hormones in their body. It's the old women. In fact, the biggest trigger to postmenopausal breast cancer is obesity, which underlies inflammation and then all the stuff we talked about.
Yeah.
And then breast cancer in the breast. This is where a lot of the misunderstanding came from too. When breast cancer develops in the breast, most of it, not all of it, there's the triple negative, but most of the breast cancer has positivity for estrogen receptors. It's alpha. Now, what triggers only alpha, predominantly alpha? Estrone. So it turns out that, going back to what we talked about, when you have a lot of inflammation, it upregulates the enzyme aromatase. And in a postmenopausal woman, or a woman that is quite obese and inflamed, it's going to trigger the conversion of androgens, mostly from the adrenal gland, into estrone. Well, breast cancer creates tremendous inflammation. Of course it does. All the mitochondria are not the same. Things are not the same. So you have inflammation right around the breast cancer, in that tissue surrounding. The breast has fat, and the breast has other connective tissue that contains the enzyme aromatase.
Yeah.
And that's actually for a purpose. Just think that when you have a woman who has, say, breastfeeding, her ovaries are not working, they're not making estradiol.
Yeah.
And then she gets a breast infection, estrogen in the form of estradiol, which would be what would be made at that point, because you don't have all that inflammation, you have a healthier young woman. So estradiol controls the immune system to help fight off a breast infection.
Yeah.
So everything that happens has a purpose. But when you have something go wrong, you're like misguided purpose. Like it's just like sabotaged. So you have the aromatase turning on and converting these androgens into estrone, which creates growth factors, proliferation. And the breast cancers have positivity for the alpha receptor, which is what is activated by the estrone that's made by the breast cancer. So there's actually some issues, because estradiol downregulates the immune system. It helps prevent that inflammation, controls all of this process. So there actually is some question that estradiol can actually help to calm down this inflammatory process of the breast cancer. And we know that women who are on estrogen, if they get breast cancer, being on the bioidentical types of hormone replacement lowers their risk. It doesn't mean you have no risk. It just lowers. So you can still get breast cancer. It's not because of, it's in spite of having hormones on board. But women who do get breast cancer, who are taking the hormone therapy for menopause with the bioidentical, they have a better prognosis.
Wow.
So we need to rethink everything. And I say there's plenty of things to be afraid of in this world. But bioidentical hormones should not be on the list, ever. What we should be afraid of is not having our hormones in our body, the foundations of creating information delivery. That's what hormones do. They tell the cells what to do. They're the instruction deliverers, So it's like you're trying to create a complex dish, but you don't have a recipe and you've never made it. You tell a cell you're supposed to make proteins, you're supposed to make enzymes, and they're not told what to do, when to do it. If you don't have the hormone, the cell's not going to behave properly. It's not going to do the job it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
So the fear of hormones causing breast cancer should just exit the scene. I keep saying, I'm so tired of that over 20-year-old study that has poisoned the well. Come on, we cleaned out that well. That study has been, refuted and reviewed and everything else. Just bury that thing, and let's create a whole new paradigm of thinking of hormones for what they are. They're life-giving. And I actually was really mad at Mother Nature for a while, because it's like, why'd they do this? Why'd she do this to us, taking away our hormones?
Yeah.
But I figured it out. So if we stayed fertile, and it's all intertwined, the prime directive of life, whether we want to or not, and I'm totally for women's reproductive choice. I don't want people to have babies when they don't want them. But the prime directive of life is the creation of life. Our female bodies are designed to create life. That's just how it is. All animals in the animal kingdom are designed to create new life. So understanding that, we can really see how hormones are the hormones of life, not just reproduction. They maintain every organ system for the purpose of having a healthy body so that you can actually be successful with fertility and reproduction and do it multiple times over. So that's why I don't call these hormones sex hormones anymore. They're the life hormones. We need to rethink all of this, reframe all of that, and then come to love our hormones. And the reason that we go through menopause is that we can't stay fertile forever. If we did, we would die. Can you imagine if women thousands of years ago were getting pregnant in their late 40s and 50s and 60s?
Well,
they
and it's
would
energetically
die.
It's
They
a
couldn't
very
do
expensive
it.
process for us.
They couldn't do it. I did obstetrics for like 30 years. I delivered thousands of babies. When I had a patient who happened to be in her late 40s, I knew she was big potential trouble. They have higher risk for every kind of medical complication of pregnancy. So nature had to give us menopause, not because it wanted to take away our life hormones, but because it had to take away fertility. And it's a package deal. It just is. So being the clever creatures that we are as humans, Homo sapiens, if we have been able to figure out how to give the hormones back, reasonably similar to what we had in our reproductive years, to enable all our organ systems to work properly and our mitochondria and so on, but leaving out the fertility part, what's wrong with that? Nothing. That's like perfect. Now, they're even talking about, creating pregnancies in older women, but that's another whole story for another day.
That's another podcast.
That's a different podcast, exactly. But, understanding that hormones are essential. They're not sufficient. You got to do all the other stuff to be healthy, for healthy aging. You got to exercise, eat the right foods, avoid toxicants, and stress control and everything else, fitness. But without those vital life hormones being replaced at reasonable levels and rhythms to somewhat, not the same, but somewhat replicate the environment, the hormonal environment of a woman at her peak health, like in her early 20s, we don't have the same medical probability without those hormones of being what I call a super ager, that you can do everything as you get even into your late 90s, to a reasonable degree, that you did in your 30s. Travel, talk, have complex discussions, read complex novels, and do what you want to do and have a quality life without lots and lots of degenerative diseases that completely destroy quality of life. So this is, why I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk to you, to get the word out, to get rid of the fake news of hormones that was started with the Women's Health Initiative, and that, it's like, a zombie cell. That's a zombie study. We got to get rid of it.
And it just keeps coming back.
Right, get rid of that zombie study.
So when it comes to the conversation of cancer and hormone replacement therapy, do not blame estrogen for what fake progesterone did. Let me ask you, because I know a lot of people listening, they're going to be interested. How do you approach hormone replacement therapy in women?
Well, I always say I'm a simple thinker. So I want to replicate what nature did. I always say the biggest catastrophe of trying to outdo nature is ultra-processed food. Let's have food that never spoils. I don't think that's worked out too well.
It's weird, right?
Like, let's have more
why is that Twinkie still on the shelf?
Exactly. More colorful foods like Fruit Loops, no, sweeter than nature. No, high fructose corn syrup hasn't worked out. Exactly. So I'm not going to try to create a new paradigm for how hormones should exist in a female, because we know a lot. We can know more about how hormones interact with the different genes, turn on, off, receptors and genes and all of that. But what we definitely know is that when you look at a real menstrual cycle, that there's a rhythm of the hormones. They're not static, like you have the same amount all the time, especially progesterone is not produced like at a static level all the time. So we're not going to recreate, I wish. There are people working on like cloned ovaries and, so future generations will have maybe ovarian replacements and so on. But right now, we don't have that. So I want to give hormones that are similar to what the ovaries did. So I look at what happens in a menstrual cycle, and I'm still evolving. I mean, my story of what I recommend, I know is not done yet because I'm always learning. And I had to and I'm still in the process of reprogramming my own brain from all the negativity. Not that I ever was negative, I never was, but just in terms of how is it best, this really critical question. Once you get over the should you have hormones, then the question becomes how to give them in the best way. And I'm still actually a work in progress on figuring out how
all
to
the
do
best
that.
doctors are, because we update on the new research.
Yes, and how to do it in a way that is doable. To make a regimen of hormones that is so complex that you're going to have 0.1% of women actually comply for any particular length of time. And I want women to be on hormones for the duration of their lives. So it has to be reasonably easy to do. Other people are not going to do it. So, but what you don't want to do is create hormones that have really high, then middle, then low. That's pellets. I'm sorry for pellet lovers out there. That is not physiologic. It is not in alliance with what nature does. Or every night progesterone. No, progesterone is a wonderful hormone, but you're not supposed to have it in your body every day in that manner. And progesterone downregulates estrogen receptors. It downregulates libido. I mean, think of the men.
Everyone in their luteal phase knows this.
That's right. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's exactly right. In the luteal phase, the sex drive is the lowest. You want that every day. And this is a new area that I'm really exploring more and more. When you take progesterone orally, up to 90% of it is converted to metabolites by the liver because it goes through. We know we don't want to take oral estrogen as estrogen replacement because it's converted predominantly to estrone. Well, when you take oral progesterone, it's converted largely to allopregnanolone. Now, that's another hormone, which is actually very beneficial. But it doesn't bind to progesterone receptors, and you're giving it in non-physiologic doses every night. It has protective effects in the brain. It's antidepressant. They actually give a mimic of it for postpartum depression. So it's it's antidepressant. It is sedating. It acts to upregulate GABA, which is a very important, calming sort of neurotransmitter. It's like estrogen is more activating, like focus, thinking, cognitive awareness. And the allopregnanolone is more like sedating. But here's the problem. Chronic exposure can impair memory. So you can't, it's just, and they're using it as a drug, like a sleeping pill. But we know that when people take sleeping pills every night, it increases their long-term risk of dementia. So is this really the right thing to do? As well, when you take the progesterone pill orally, because it downregulates estrogen receptors, there's actually some little studies that have been published showing that the arteries, instead of being dilated like they are, really relaxed, when the estrogen comes on board, the estradiol, instead they constrict. Oh my goodness. So this is not good. So I'm re-exploring, rethinking everything with the whole progesterone routine, but I never give, unless people, I can't, there's just so much I can do. But I try really hard to convince people not to have progesterone every night and to give physiologic levels, so you get levels of estradiol in your blood that are similar to what you would get sort of on average in a menstrual cycle, not the relic, legacy of the Women's Health Initiative, the lowest dose. No, what do I want? In everything. The most efficacious dose, not the lowest dose. When I say I want you to have the lowest amount of exercise to keep you alive, the lowest amount of vegetables. What the heck? You want the best amount, the most efficacious, that's going to give you the best health to optimize everything in your body. And that's not the lowest dose. In fact, the lowest dose of estradiol that's made by the ovaries is when you start your period. And that's the most pro-inflammatory time of a woman's cycle. And it is inflammatory because you're actually contracting. That's inflammation induced with inflammatory cytokines in the uterus to give a little bit of contractions. It shouldn't. If you have too extreme menstrual cramps, it means you're overly inflamed. Because you're making too many of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. And so a little bit, it's like a mini version of labor. Just get out that dead, dying uterine lining. And that's a pro-inflammatory time. That's not what we want all the time in the body. No. Oh, another thing I just want to make sure I mention really quickly, estradiol is very key to one of the other reasons why you have a lower risk of dying if you get breast cancer when you're on hormones, is that estradiol causes the cells to be more like super glued together of the cancer. Because what kills people with breast cancer isn't cancer in the breast, it's when it metastasizes to the liver, the lungs, the brain, and so on. And metastasis means that the cells are not together and they start breaking off. Estradiol helps to keep the cells like glued together, cohesiveness. So you're less likely to have metastasis. So I just want to throw that in. There's multiple ways that estradiol is protective for everything, for like literally everything in the body. And we just need to, get on board and give hormones in a way that is similar to what a woman had in the most, the healthiest time of her life, and stop with these made-up regimens that do not align with anything physiologic. And think of all these other weird regimens, biased, like, estriol is great. But you're not supposed to have that as your dominant estrogen in the reproductive years or any other time of life other than in pregnancy. And why would I ever want to even try, which is ridiculous, a biased crowd. They're not replicating pregnancy anyway. It's ridiculous. But it's not even close. I mean, the levels are not even near what happens in pregnancy and the progesterone. It's all made up concoction with these ratios. But estriol is wonderful hormone, but that's not the hormone of life in terms of like reproductive age. And pregnancy is a time when your immune system is altered so that women who get sick, like they get COVID, they get the flu, they get chickenpox, their immune system, because it's down-regulated, just like an immune modulator, that's why they all have warnings like, you can get infection, you could die. So women who get infections when they're pregnant have a much higher morbidity and mortality. We want to do this to our postmenopausal women. And, we want to have an activated immune system when we want it activated. That's how we fight infections, and that's how we fight cancers. We want to have estriol, but we want to have estriol produced by the body to self-regulate its production of estrone and estriol from estradiol the way nature intended it. So these fake regimens with pellets and biased and nightly progesterone, 2 thumbs down.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end this conversation. I could literally talk to you for hours. I wish we had more time, but I do just want to express my gratitude for the time you have given us, this great wisdom that you have shared. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was so fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If this is the kind of content you're into, then I highly recommend checking out this.